What up, fam? Welcome back to Entrepreneur Hour Podcast and Entrepreneur Hour TV, where we create superhuman entrepreneurs. Today, we're going to talk about data, a lot about data, with somebody that is tremendously more intelligent than I about life in general, but also with a specific topic. Dr. Denise Gosnell, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Chris. I am very glad to be here. Great topic, by the way, as well.
Yeah, phenomenal topic. And so you and I were talking about the problem, and I immediately when I was researching you, it just hit me because, we're reading in my book club right now, the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. And it's funny because the book was written in the early 90s and the world has gotten so much more complex now because of the internet, because of all these data points and these things that we can now gather and glean information from that we just couldn't do before. Right. And so it's a
Absolutely.
beautiful thing. And it's allowed for us to do things that we never thought possible. And people are getting, oh my gosh, I'm getting leads for less than $1. Like what? That's, and we can actually
Yeah.
measure that. Before, I always give this kind of paint this picture, this dichotomy of like, okay, billboard, right? Let's think about that. Let's think about that paradigm. And I have no idea, right? Unless somebody tells me over the phone, they call from my business, say, hey, I saw your billboard. You're like, I think my marketing is working, but I really don't know now.
Exactly.
And it's not just marketing. It extends to many, many other facets and capacities in our lives. But primarily what we're going to talk about today is marketing. That's what my audience needs. Is where they get kind of stuck in the mud. So it's difficult, right? Because we
It
just
is.
don't know what to do with this stuff, or we don't know what we should be reading, or we misinterpret it. And there's just a really load of complexities there to dive into. So, but I want to first back up. I know I'm kind of presenting here what we want to talk about, but tell us about you. Why are you the person to come on and talk to us about this?
Yeah, Chris, that's a great question. And already a bunch of avenues I can see that we can explore from, understanding how to label your data, that you were just talking about. But why I'm here is that the complexity that you're talking about, Chris, with the world of data is much simpler to understand when you realize that your data is connected. And the world of connected data is what I have been researching and then making a part of my career. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. And also the world of understanding whether or not what you're modeling and looking at actually correlates to the data-driven decision you're trying to drive is very much a part of how I help companies and corporations around the world reconfigure their internal data structures or internal data processes so that you can drive informed decisions from data.
Interesting. So, okay, so give me an example. It was called Company X because I don't want you to divulge any names. So
Yeah.
talk to me about a usual relationship and what that would look like, and like what do these decisions entail and what kind of data are you looking at?
Yeah. So Company X, I would say this is probably the most popular thing I've done around the world for banks, logistics companies, and global insurance companies as well, where Company X has a customer. And that customer either is coming into them from a bunch of different channels. I think, the omni-channel lifestyle is what we're referring to it now. You've got customers visiting your stores. You have customers on your online, making online orders, or even calling in your call center. And it's a very common pattern for these, Fortune 100 companies to be representing what we call a customer 360 view of all of their customers' data. And they're using that, they're using the relationships from the customer to their data at the core database model for modeling this. So let's think about it. Let's say you're an insurance company. You have your customer has claims. They have maybe a store that they sit down with your insurance agent, or then there's a number that they use to call into your call center. Actually, in computers and in your databases now, we're helping these companies transform modeling that for billions of customers, or 100 million customers or so, from using rows and columns to actually connecting all of their data about their customer to a relationship. So this customer is related to this store, or this customer is related to this agent, things like that. This customer filed this claim. And they use relationships now around their customer to connect everything together across all of the silos of their company's data. So that's the type of transformation that we're doing for companies.
So is it really about connecting all the various touch points together, right? So like if I did something online and then later on I called, is that kind of like, or throughout my relationship with Company X and I'm the customer, is about, hey, how can I make sure that all of these experiences that I have are connected to where they can have that data on the relationship that I'm building with them or my activities therein?
Yes, that's exactly what it's about. It provides a better customer experience, but then it also helps every company to kind of break down all of those silos. So even just two of those, right?
Yeah.
Calling in and visiting a store. wouldn't it be great if you called in and they were like, well, you just were at a store and you made this purchase, is something
Right.
wrong? They were able to be a little more proactive about why you're visiting them again. And
Yeah, that
having,
makes total sense.
yeah, so a lot of legacy systems, your point of sale system was in one database over here, and then your internet sales maybe were in a different database. And so that was completely opaque to the internal workers of the company, but then also to
Yeah.
the customer. And customers
Yeah.
felt frustrated because they're like, well, you should know that I purchased this here and I'm trying to do, X over here.
I've read
That's,
where customer service in
yeah.
the future is likely going to be all AI driven, meaning when you say you tweet, right, or
Mhm.
you message, right, it'll be completely autonomous or automated, right? We'll be talking to some bot, right? But the thing is, it'll be able to immediately extrapolate and pull out all that data to be able to continue the conversation. Because one of the more frustrating things that I experience, and I know this is just an inconvenience, not necessarily like an essential, but it does speak to, I think, the internal operations of an organization, is when I have to restate my issue that I'm trying to solve 5,000
Exactly.
times, where if it could
Exactly.
say, we saw you message 3 weeks ago about X. Is this what you're blah, blah, blah. Right. So they're starting to get a little bit more intuitive. I just had to reschedule my flight with Delta. Long story, but I had to move some stuff around. And the app was able to kind of start connecting the dots a little bit more than some of the others do. Is that the future of what you see as the opportunity? Is that you could basically have it entirely systematized with this kind of data connection?
Absolutely. Yes. And the brands that you're starting to sense that as a consumer, realizing that they have that unified single pane of glass into your experience with them,
Mm.
those are the brands that you can probably guess are using graph technology. This is what we call this. We call it graph
Graph
technology,
technology.
but not graphs like bar charts and pie charts. We mean
Okay.
graphs like connected dots to lines, or what we would in computer science say are vertices and edges.
Does it also
Um,
provide you with predictability too? Like, do I fall into an avatar profile given my behavioral tracks with these data points?
It does. And you probably already experienced some of that prediction. Do you use LinkedIn a lot, Chris?
Yeah, I'm active on it. Yeah,
Yeah. So you know that window where they recommend if you should you should become connected to certain colleagues.
sure.
They're using your relationships to your
Mm,
network behind the scenes to what they do. They call this link prediction, where if you're friends with someone who's friends with somebody else, and both of those are very strong professional networks, they'll send you a recommendation that you connect with that second level friend. So that is exactly where the relationships of how you navigate your professional network on LinkedIn are doing link prediction to predict how you should be connected into the world, because that's how humans think about our network, right? So
yeah.
we were kicking off and talking earlier about the friends that we have in common, about how we came to having this
Right,
conversation
right, right, right.
today. And humans think about their professional network according to who they know and who you know and what our shared friends are. And actually representing that into the computer at the database level is new. And that's new technology that we've been experiencing maybe in the past 10 years. And
Mm.
that's how we're able to start doing some of these more unified experiences that where people are calling AI. But at the end of the day, it just means we're no longer using rows and columns and tables to
Right.
represent data. We're representing the links or the relationships in data
So
instead.
is it fair to say it's more three-dimensional than two-dimensional now? Is that an
Exactly.
articulate way of saying it?
Yeah, it's like we've been staring at the same table or spreadsheet
Mm.
of data, and now we're deciding to step maybe to the left and look at the inner dimensions or the connections within the data as being much more important, because that describes the behaviors that you're mentioning here.
Sure. Now, so a lot of people in my audience is going to know what this means for sure. We talk about something like the Facebook algorithm. So immediately when
Yes.
we're talking about LinkedIn and kind of predicting who would be a good connection for you, I immediately equate that to algorithm, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of what Facebook marketers have been able to benefit from, or marketers in general using Facebook rather, is that Facebook has more data on you than probably the CIA, and you being any Facebook user that's active on the platform. Is that the same thing as an algorithm? Are these mutually, or can these be just exchanged just freely? Or is there a difference between what something like a Facebook algorithm for marketing entails versus what you're talking about with LinkedIn?
I see that they're different.
Okay.
And I see that when you say algorithm, I hear expensive, because to me,
Mm.
that's going to be a team of people sitting off in some room doing a lot of calculations that are going to take a long
Really?
time.
How's it different?
It's different because when we're talking about storing the relationships and data, we're talking about putting it into a structure where you can just look it up and you look up the answer.
Right.
Instead of running an algorithm that's going to do a lot of calculations, you can do both. But in this exacting example that you're talking about, there's going to be longer running algorithms that extract complicated behaviors over time across all of Facebook's data. And that's a lot different than, say, LinkedIn saying, for Chris, who are your first connections? And then for each of those connections, who are their first connections, which is the same thing as saying, who are the friends of Chris? And when you put this in a graph database, or you put this in a database that helps you query through the connections and the relationships in your data, that makes it much faster and much cheaper than a room full of people running algorithms on their data. So that's how I see them as different, if that makes sense.
It does, and it doesn't. And that's just me not being as smart as you are. So when you say a room full of people, meaning that there's so much heavy lifting involved with actually crafting that algorithm, is that?
It is. And maybe this example will go, maybe this example will help kind of highlight it. So
Sure.
Some of the most popular questions that people want to know when data is connected are, well, what is the path between these two things? Like the Kevin Bacon problem, right? Everyone says that if you're in a movie, there's like 6 degrees of separation between any actor and Kevin Bacon.
I've
right?
heard this. I've heard this theory. I don't know. I haven't looked into it, but I've heard like the nuances of it, but I've heard this and it seems
interesting. And it is true. And it's actually shorter than 6, but anyway.
The movie universe revolves around Kevin Bacon, basically.
It does. But when you're thinking like Facebook or like LinkedIn, any two people on those platforms, there's a way to connect them.
Right.
They know right. So there's that path between them.
Yeah.
So that's a really valuable question because that question tells you about your community. It tells you about what you're most likely to click on from a marketing and an advertisement perspective. So it's really important to understand your connections.
Do you lose the accuracy with that velocity?
What do you mean by that?
So one of the things that Facebook is notorious for, and again, this might not be a relevant question outside of just this example of Facebook versus LinkedIn, right? This could be entirely different, regardless, depending on what we're talking, case by case.
Yeah.
But one of the things that Facebook is so good at with it is the volume of the data points that makes it so relevant for who you're marketing and advertising to, because it can tell you the things that they've done and tracks them all over the internet, right? But what you're talking about, it sounds like it's more of a seamless process of getting to, this is a good person for you to connect with because of boom, boom, and boom. And so you connect them, right? So it seems the velocity seems much quicker than what you're going to have to go through all of that data with an algorithm.
Yes.
But do you sacrifice accuracy in doing so? Because you're making assumptions based off of maybe a fewer amount of data points.
Yes. You might be. And to your point that you actually mentioned at the very beginning about labeling your data, if someone called you and said, hey, I saw your ad on a billboard, and that's the only way you actually have a labeled data point.
Right.
On either of these systems, be it the deeper algorithms or the recommendations we're talking about with relationships, understanding accuracy in either of those scenarios is fundamental to having these labeled pieces of data that actually say this was a successful event. So for Facebook, when you're running ads, if you're thinking about understanding your marketing funnels, the most important piece that you can set up is actual labeled events that you're tracking throughout any part of that funnel, because that really is the gold. That's the event that you're trying to predict on, or that you're trying to understand from a data-driven perspective. So on Facebook, for example, you could run an ad. And if you have your call to action on that ad be that they want you to send a message, just as an example,
right?
What we highly recommend, and a practice that I use with the businesses that I'm running, is I'm sure you've heard of this, having A/B ads, where you have 2 ads with the exact same copy, but then you just have something slightly tweaked between the 2 of them.
We call it split testing, but yeah,
exactly. And without having that actual event in your database of whether or not they clicked, you can't really talk about accuracy on whether or not one ad was successful or one ad was not as successful. So when you are thinking about marketing on Facebook or any platform, there's two things that are fundamental to have from a data practice perspective. First of which is that you do have split testing or A/B testing set up, and that it is second on an actual trackable event, so that you have the idea of whether or not this ad is performing, or that the thing you're testing is accurate. So those 2 items together, split testing, A/B testing with like labeled data, are the fundamental pieces that people forget all the time when they're setting up their internal data structures.
That's great advice. What are the, and I totally agree too, it's amazing how many people we come across that have not set up what they call either sometimes they call it a tag or a tag manager. Sometimes they call it a
Hmm.
pixel, right? Facebook is
Yeah.
pixel, Pinterest, they call it tag, and they use a tag manager to manage your, basically
Hmm.
it's to be able to track events that happen on your site, like you're talking about.
Exactly.
Um, and we do see people that don't have that. It's like, dude, you're like, there's so many things you're missing out on by not doing that. And I get that there's like some
Hmm.
nuances in terms of how to take that piece of custom code, but they've made it so much more streamlined and so much easier. So that's my little insert of, guys, please do this stuff. And also set up, you can set up goals and all these various things on Google Analytics as well. So you can track your goals and how well you're doing on those goals you establish for yourself. Really, really important
Exactly.
stuff. So take some time to learn how to do that.
Exactly.
But for you, Doc, what are some things that you guys, because we say split test and it sounds like a fancy word, or we say A/B test, right? Same thing,
Hmm.
guys. It's exact same thing. It's tomato. But what are some things that you're split testing? Because a lot of people, it sounds like it's, fancy term, and they're like, oh, okay, whatever. But what are some things that you're doing? Is it the image that you're using? Is it the headline that you're using, the hook? I mean, what is it that you're actually split testing, or where do you look to first start? Like, what's the first domino you're going to test, or the second or third, or what? In what order of priority do you usually list those?
So I think Chris, that's a good question. But so when I partner with solving this question, I rely heavily on, my marketing operations team to
Mhm.
kind of take that question and say,
Right.
these are more of the UI UX experiences that we're
You just tell them
testing.
if the data says it's right or wrong. They make the
But
decision. Am I
it,
get where you're getting your drift?
that's what I'm saying. And I think my point here, though, Chris, is that so many people just throw items up there,
Yeah.
curious to see if they're going to, be useful in their business. And they want to be data driven and make useful decisions according to the data coming in from these experiences.
Mm,
But if you don't have that track all the way from the
yeah.
beginning to the end in your system of understanding your customer's journey, what touch points they're hitting, what gate they're getting through, and
Right.
whether or not they are going to be getting through that goal point in your funnel. To me, as a data driven person, that's the important question, to make sure that you're architecting your pipeline so that you have these pipelines set up so that you have a conversion rate that makes sense and that you're measuring what you think you're measuring. So I like to partner with my marketing operations team and let them handle the copy, let them handle the different items they want to test. But the fundamental ways to ensure that you're accurately tracking, if test A is different from test B. That's the type of the world that I like to live in, and make sure that we're counting everything correctly.
But are you guys, so when you're analyzing that, are you just looking at purely the conversion metrics of saying like, this is what worked and this is what didn't work? Or how are you able to like really dive into the mechanics, or again, I've said this word like 4 times, but I'll say it again because I can't think of another word right now, but the nuances of like what they're doing on that specific page. Like we use something called Hotjar, which you might be familiar with. I'm sure it's
Mhm.
supremely inferior compared to the kind of data you're using. And you still have to, you can watch how people engage on your page, or any page for that matter on your site. But you still have to kind of paint a story that might be subjective and biased or whatever, might not mean
Mhm.
anything, right? It could
Yeah.
just be a random bot on your site or something that's not even a real human, right? You can usually tell when it's fake and when it's a real user. But how are you able to take away meaningful insights with how people are operating, or engaging on your sites outside of just the conversion aspect of things, or is that all you measure?
I mean, it's difficult, right? What you're describing is really difficult,
It's really
and
hard.
it really is hard. And that is why you are hearing so many buzzwords trending about data science,
Yeah.
machine learning, artificial intelligence. Those people on your team who are capable of analyzing large digests of data and telling you, okay, this is the behavior that's more correlated or more aligned to bot behavior, or
Hmm.
these behaviors are more aligned to what normal humans would be doing on your site. It's those types of individuals that you need to have employed to look at your data and answer those questions for you. For example, the most basic item that you have to have is an established user journey that you expect. Like,
Yeah.
you want to drive your customers through your experience on this journey throughout your properties. So that's your hypothesis, or that's what you would hope would happen.
Right.
But now you need to actually measure and see where they go. You need to follow their journey of paths through your website and see where it is that they're churning, they're dropping off your pages, what they're actually clicking on, and having all of that processed so that you can kind of correlate or map up expectation to reality. Just starting there is where you need to be to make informed decisions with data.
You say that. And last week, my wife is more of a sophisticated marketer than I am. She's been doing this for far longer. And I was getting kind of one of my funnels. I was getting kind of frustrated with. And I've been, coming up with all these theories, right? You talked about hypotheses, what have
Mhm.
you. This is why, I made this determination. This was it. I was
Yeah.
getting ready to go like change some stuff and, put a new video and, whatever, and make all these tweaks and adjustments and stuff like that. She goes, well, let's sit down and actually look at your numbers first. Right. And so
Exactly.
we looked at every part of the process. It's like a 5-step process. And then we looked at the data that coincided with that. Right. And my theory, albeit it was it made sense, right? I could make the argument for it, but the data didn't back it up. The data didn't
Exactly.
didn't validate it. And furthermore, there would have been so much more work that I had to do to validate my theory versus what was actually happening. I didn't have a conversion issue on one aspect. It was really just closing at the cart, right? It was, and
Mhm.
this was obviously in a sales capacity. We weren't converting in the cart. Well, everything
Mhm.
else was numbers that are ridiculously high. And I was about to just go throw it away and try something new. So I think, and there's a reason I bring this up, Denise, I think this is not just me. I think this happens to a lot of people. We get really frustrated when something isn't working. But I think the part of the part of the process is the most challenging aspect is what you just mentioned. It's analyzing not just everything from a macro standpoint, but getting into the micro and being able
Mhm.
to look at each individual aspect of what's going on and look at it individualized. I had the
Mhm.
same process from a health standpoint of like looking at, what was going on. I'm a big health like biohacker, and it's like, well, I can't figure out exactly what's going on. It's the same thing. It's every process through the digestive process and figuring that out. And it's like there's 5, 6, 7, 8 different steps. So it's really
Mhm.
difficult to not just look at it as a whole and say, this isn't working, I'm moving on. So here's the deal. So I think that there's nothing really to argue. I think that's a pretty, unless you want to add something to that. But
Yeah,
when
I
do
mean,
we go ahead.
yeah, I would add that the commonality that you and I have
Mhm,
is twofold. We like to keep it simple,
mhm,
and we're okay with checking our ego at the door.
sure,
So what we're both describing here is measuring the difference between expectation and reality,
right,
and making sure we have a process to check ourselves and what actually is really happening, and then using that process to inform what we do next.
yeah.
And that it actually is a lot harder than what you would think, because I've talked to so many people around the world who get stuck on doing that, but it's mainly because their personal expectations are getting in the way of making simple small changes.
I think you're right, and I think you said it well too. I think it's a point that needs to be mentioned again. I think ego. I think big time ego gets in the way to make those decisions, right? I think some people are like, well, I don't, or maybe they don't even think about analyzing that aspect of it. Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I didn't do it the way I should have done it. Maybe I didn't do this. Maybe I didn't do this. So I think that's a big. There's one thing that I've learned from marketing. To me, it's more marketing psychology than marketing. In order to have the empathy that you require to be able to really feel and understand your audience, you better be in touch with your own self, right? I'm not trying to
Mhm.
get in like a therapy session here, but man, that makes a big difference.
It does. It does.
Anyway, so what I was going to talk to you about to kind of tie into that is I think a lot of us do what I was about to do. Just throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? And
Mhm.
start over and just do something else. So when you're going through and you're helping people and you're helping these companies kind of analyze, every step of their system, is it purely just walking them through the way that I just, kind of mentioned and diagramming it out on a whiteboard? And I'm sure it's way more sophisticated than that. But
No, that's
um,
exactly what it is. It is whiteboard diagramming.
hey, then I am really doing things right then, because that's
You are.
exactly what
No,
I'm doing.
I think the whiteboard diagramming, though, is my favorite part of what I get to do every day.
That's awesome.
The reason it is because of the human connection that you create when you're talking about your data on a whiteboard.
Yeah.
And this is basically what most of my days go like when I have the opportunity to work with customers around the world.
Mhm.
They've got problems with their data, and it's all over the place. And so they're bringing us in to talk about their general data problems. And they'll be on the whiteboard and they're kind of drawing, well, our sales team is working off of the customer data over here, and our marketing funnels are bringing in kind of like the front of the house information over here, and our support team that's handling all calls, they have all the data about the customer over here. And I'm like, well, how do you know what everyone's experience was from their marketing team before they entered your sale, when they actually became a customer, and then when they're talking about support? How do you
Mm.
tie that together?
Yeah, that's tough.
And they look at the whiteboard, and they literally see that they have drawn three separate systems.
Yeah.
and you can't tie them together.
Right.
But if you were to tie them together, that's how you're going to be able to model the empathy, Chris. I love that
Yeah.
word that you just brought up. It really is about using technology to model the empathy of your customer, and being able to connect your information from all of those parts of your customer's journey and connecting them together is about your customer's relationship with your brand. And that's why the technology for allowing you to model the relationships and data is taking off now. Like we've been talking about with graph technology, that's really the only technology out there that can help you do that, so that you have that one view of your customer throughout your system.
Yeah. It's so tough because so if you just look at the data and you say, okay, this is where they're falling off, but it might be more than that though, right? And I think it might be, okay, here's the deal. I provide them with an intro offer, right? They opted in and I'm immediately providing them with an intro offer. Maybe they weren't ready for an offer yet. Maybe I hadn't built enough of a relationship because I'm going to a cold audience. Maybe I need to invite them to a challenge or invite them to a webinar or do something else that provides value before I present the offer. So I think that's the hard part is, okay, I've got this data. Now what do I do with that? How
Mm-hmm.
do I make decisions based on that? So I feel like that is still a little bit, there's a little bit ambiguity around that. I think still a little bit
Yeah.
of challenging aspects. So how do you normally address that? When do you tell people this strategy isn't working, even though the numbers are aligning, the sales aren't aligning, the back end issue we've got with conversions, or maybe it's a front end, like what direction you usually send people down other than just telling them it's working or it's not working,
Yeah.
providing another theory, another hypothesis as far as challenging them to understand their customer and where they should take them next, given the data that they have.
Yeah, Chris, that's a great question. And it's, I'm not going to lie, it's a chicken and an egg problem, right? So I don't want to lie to
Dang
you.
it, I was looking for the holy grail out of you and you just
I wish
completely let me down.
I wish I had the holy grail for you.
Oh, man.
But if we were looking at your data, here's what I would say. If you were telling me about your conversion rates, I would ask you historically, what type of customers do you have who were successful? And I think as a data person, what I'm really asking you about in that question is, have you been labeling or tracking an event historically that you care about?
Yeah.
Because that tells me a lot when I'm in conversation with people and they say, hey, my conversions aren't running well. And so like, well, let's look at your historical conversions, and maybe historically you actually never even had that event set up. So that's why I say it's a chicken and egg problem, because if that's kind of where we go, it's like, all right, let's just make our best guess. Let's make a decision and put something out there that we think our audience is going to resonate with. And let's ensure that we also have the systems up and running to measure it to the event you care about. So for the people who are trying to dabble into machine learning, we would call this a labeled event or like supervised learning. It's giving you your training data. It's that line in the sand where you're trying to say, did my people even get there and cross over it or not? And without having that line that you're measuring and tracking, it'd be really hard to talk you through and look at your data and say where it's not working. So depending on where you are with that process,
Sure.
chicken or egg, like go set it up, make your best guess, and just make sure that you can start to model and understand what the data is going to tell you about your best guess. Or maybe you already have it up. So let's go look at it historically, and let's find the groups of your customers who did successfully get over that line and inspect what they did and why they trended and why they were successfully getting through that conversion funnel.
So one thing I think you validated with everything you've said and everything we've discussed as a whole is we usually teach people to just get one funnel working, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just focus on getting that one working. There's so many people that they've got the product they're trying to sell here. And then at the same time, they're trying to do this and they're trying to do that. And they've got another, hey, I want to start this business too, right? And it's like, man, if you're really doing this right, meaning you're rolling up your sleeves, you're doing the work, you're analyzing the data, there's so much heavy lifting needs to be done. I don't think they realize the power of nailing one funnel. I'm not going to steal one from Russell Brunson and say you're one funnel away. I'll let him keep that. But to a large degree, I don't think he's wrong. And we very much experienced, I think this is the power of leveraging technology in today's world is if you get one funnel that's converting and it's really optimized and it's really resonating with a certain demographic of people and you start putting ad spend behind it, right? And I think taking it, and I always say, crawl, walk, run, right? This is part of the crawl. When you get to run, you can start spending thousands of dollars a day to drive traffic to that landing page because it's converting and it's optimized as well as it is because you've done the work, you've analyzed the data, you've done all of the heavy lifting, you've gone to the hot jar, you've worked with somebody like you, like you've really mastered it. You don't need all this other stuff. I think people, they strip the beauty away from simplicity of saying, this works, this is what we do well. And we put a lot of time and effort into it, maybe way more than other people did. So is that a common problem you see with a lot of people? Is they're just way too spread out and not dialed in enough on nailing one first and understanding the process of what that required?
Yes, I see that all the time. And I see that all the time with people uh, wanting to over apply, the world of machine learning, data science, algorithms, and like working with all of
Mm,
these data points to just kind of throw everything at their data. When the super simple techniques of defining goals, measurable goals, and even just looking at a percentage of people who meet that goal or do not meet that goal, um, is some of the most empowering ways that you can get started with making data, with using data to inform your
yeah.
business decisions. So absolutely, keep it simple. And when it comes down to the connected data components of how people keep it simple, that one's also hard because for understanding how to use connections in your data, we're at a phase of trying to figure out what crawling, walking, and running means for the community, because we all already interact all day with the very powerful ways that people are using connected data, like we've talked about for connections,
Right.
recommendations on LinkedIn or Facebook. The whole world's probably using Netflix or your favorite streaming device these days, and they're also using all the connections of who watched what movies to recommend more content to you on Net. Like, we're already used to the power of what it feels like to be running with connected data.
Right.
And it's really hard to, if you want to apply this to your business, it's really hard to recognize that you've got to crawl
Yeah.
and walk before you can get all the way to recommendations with connections and data. But I really love that analogy, Chris, because teaching people to be patient and do the simple items
Right.
is where we need to be, no matter where you are on your data journey, with connected or with just regular non-connected data.
Do you think that, I know there's been a big issue. I know the Cambridge Analytica thing was a big disaster, albeit it's difficult because it's not something that Facebook did, but it's somebody that used Facebook to do what they did. And Facebook was held accountable because they're Facebook, right? And
Mhm.
it was scary to me. And I watched a lot of, it was humorous, or at least I found it to be humorous, watching Mark Zuckerberg kind of answer the questions from a lot of these. I think they were senators or, Congress, whatever. Um, but like they just clearly did not understand even how Facebook, I think one went even so far as to like say, how do you make money? And it's just like, how did you enter into this conversation not knowing how Facebook makes money and just expose
Yeah.
yourself nationally for not understanding? So I think there's a real misunderstanding about technology and how we're using data. And, this is an entirely new, uh, not entirely, but it's a new world that we're experiencing, right? Of data and how we use data.
Mhm.
Where do you see this trending? Where do you see this going in terms of privacy? Do you see anything this is more of a hypothetical type question, not
Yeah.
necessarily going to be, in terms of the mechanics that we were talking about before. Where do you kind of see things trending? I saw even smart TVs now. They're cheaper because they're able to use your data and say sell your data instead, and they can sell to reduce costs. I don't know if that
Mhm.
was conspiratorial, if it was realistic, I don't know. But what does the world look like as you see it in 10, 15 years from now? And where do we go as far as data and our abilities to use data in a meaningful and productive way?
It's going to be a very interesting tug of war. And it's going to be very interesting because data, I'm sure you've had people on here talk about this before, how data essentially is our new oil. It's our new economy
Yeah.
of how people are exchanging value on the internet. It's your information. And let's think about this entire conversation. We've been talking about the power of what you can do when you capture your customers' data, and now you can use that to drive more business.
Mm.
But that's with our business hat on. Now when you put your consumer hat on, that feels different,
Yeah.
because it feels like you're
When it's done
being
to you.
yeah, it feels like you're being forced into this world that you don't know if
Yeah.
you want to opt in or opt out.
Yeah.
And so over the next 10 to 15 years, I see this being a very interesting struggle between those of us who want to help inform our business decisions with data, but also at the same time are consumers of these services. because those two worlds essentially are kind of at an impasse on how we're going to be moving together, because one world is wanting to use your data to increase business, and the other is wanting to, essentially start to bring more of your personal details back inside because you don't want to be involved. So.
Yeah, and it's tough to say, it's one of those, it's too complex to say it's amor, emor, or moral, right? I think it comes down to the user and how they're uh, utilizing these devices and in what capacity they are. Are they doing it responsibly? And then you've got an entire world you got to try to, I don't want to say hold accountable. Maybe that's not the right way of saying it, but it's different when you have so many players potentially in the game that can be doing this. You could be anywhere in the world as long as you have internet access and be able to potentially have access to utilize these things. It doesn't mean you can necessarily gather people's data in a way, but I mean, there's some scary stuff out there in terms of, ransomware and things like that are out there that can take people's information, use it, and steal your identification, stuff like that. So it's one of those things where I don't think it's going away. Like you said, I think it's something that's here. It's here to stay. Then it comes down to, okay, what do we do? Does the government regulate it? How do, just keep it open and free and just kind of deal with the consequences thereof? I think it's really interesting questions, but I think as far as the business owner is concerned, the people we're talking to, I think the big thing is, not to steal a line, and I'm a big comic book fan, but not to steal a line from Spider-Man, but with great power comes great responsibility, right? And I think we need to make sure that we're doing these things responsibly and using our data in a responsible way, and that we're actually delivering something that's of value. Because we have to overcome this challenge all the time. I've been in where we provided services and physical products, and now selling info products, which is what I do with the online stuff that we do. There's so much of a hurdle to overcome because there's so many people that are just selling snake oil online. And I don't mean to be, accusatory, but there's a huge hurdle that people have to overcome because they've had bad experiences, right? With people utilizing and leveraging these platforms to sell something at maybe a price that was ridiculous and then not really get much value out of it. So I think it's a lot of challenging questions that we have to answer over the coming years.
It is. And I feel like for those who are really close to the data space, there's some basic things that you should do either, as a business owner wanting to use your data versus a consumer. So on each of those, if you're a business owner and you know that you need to start using data to make more informed decisions, you want to move fast, but you can't forget security. So if you're setting up your internal systems and you're using all these tools to model your funnel or to model your different ways that your customers are interacting with your services, security needs to be at the forefront of your design and what you bring into your systems and where that data is going.
What does that look like as you see it? What do you mean by that from a practical standpoint?
Right. So what I mean by that is that you are using tools that are certified for encrypting your data end to end and making it more secure so that it's not as easy to be hacked, as an example. So you're gonna want to look for encryption services, and you're gonna want to look to make sure that these tools and these companies that you're using to move your customers' data around hit the different security compliance regulations that are already out there.
Cool.
So that's going to slow you down as a business person wanting to get your data up and running and fast. But if you have a concern about what your customers could say about your services, absolutely be looking for encryption, look for secure tools to use, etc. On the other side, though, we've been kind of talking about what it's like to be a consumer in this space. And from that perspective, I think, Chris, when was, the last time that you used an ATM or like you were putting in any kind of PIN on a pad? You know how there's that shield right there? We don't second guess why we need that shield because we want everyone to, we're not going to go flashing our PIN or other really important information in public.
You don't know me. I live wild. I'm kidding.
That is true.
I'm kidding.
But I think for the consumer, it's about understanding, well, what is that shield that we all should be using on the internet? And
that makes sense.
Absolutely. Anytime that you are connected to Wi-Fi, it should be a secure connection. You should be on a VPN. And if you are ever on like a Starbucks Wi-Fi or some kind of coffee shop Wi-Fi, you should assume that people have access to what you're browsing on the internet. So if you wouldn't browse it on a coffee shop Wi-Fi, maybe you should consider whether or not you should be doing that publicly at all on like from an unsecured network. So this idea of a VPN and making sure that you're on an encrypted tunnel into the internet is that PIN guardrail that we all have now on all of the ATMs that we use, or any other type that you're punching in personal information. That's what that is. And as a consumer, accepting the responsibility that you need to protect yourself and you need to set that up for yourself is some advice that I would have to people who need to ensure that they're, being a little bit more secure with the data they put out.
Totally agree. Okay, so you have a book, and then obviously what you guys are doing as a company, it's DataStax.
Yes, DataStax.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about that, about the book. I assume the book is more along the lines of just data collection, data assessment, stuff like that. But you feel free to tell us what you want to tell us about it.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So I wrote a book called The Practitioner's Guide to Graph Data with Matthias Broschele as my co-author. Sweet. And we wrote a book for business users and for developers, so that anyone in this space wanting to understand how to use connected data, they know what the most common ways are that other companies are doing it. So we talked about at the beginning about the most common way that people are connecting their customers and all the data across all their channels. That's the most common pattern on how people use the connections in their data. And we walk you through exactly how to do that in a book. So I think the main audience for this is going to be your data scientists, your data engineers, and some of the developers that you're probably employing, so that they can learn how to use this technology. And we walk all the way through how power companies, how the entire power grid in the United States is using this technology, about how you can do that link prediction we talked about. And even at the very end, we show you how Netflix does what they do for that recommendation of their movies.
That's cool.
It's all about the power of connecting your data together and the cool things you can do with it. So our book essentially walks you through how to do that.
Very cool. And then with you guys at DataStax, is it purely, it sounds like there's a consultative capacity that you like actually work hands-on with people. Is that the only way people can work with you guys, or is there a SaaS play involved? There's kind of software people use to kind of understand their data. What does that look like?
Yeah, so at DataStax, we have a platform so that you can use our databases in the cloud. Cool. So almost any company these days is trying to make more secure processes and pipelines for their data. So our main products are going to be a database called Cassandra, and different ways to use that. And during this book, we walk you through how to use Cassandra and model the connections of data in Cassandra, so that you can get more value out of your data. So at DataStax, you can use our product. And you also can use us as consultants and things like that. We have both of those lines of business.
Awesome. Love it. All right, guys, I will put those links below so you can check that out, both the book and DataStax website. You can check out both. Denise, thank you so much. I enjoyed it. This was really stretching for me to have to keep up with you here. You're quite the intelligent person, but I appreciate it. I appreciate you taking time to walk me through everything.
Chris, thank you so much for having me on today. This was very fun.
All right. Thanks so much.